It's March, which can only mean one thing. It's March Mad Spring Football. And it's time to talk about the biggest questions, headlines, and things to keep an eye on for each team in the Big Ten. First up, the West Division. Let's start things off with the team that probably made the most noise in the transfer portal in the Big Ten, and they needed to, and that is the University of Nebraska. Now, Michigan State did a good job. Jalen Berger, Daniel Barker, two pretty big transfers at Michigan State, but I think Nebraska did exactly what they needed to in bolstering their team this offseason. Here's a big question I have for them entering spring football. Will they have a firm starting quarterback once the spring game is played inside Memorial Stadium? New offensive staff and some new transfer quarterbacks. Here's what I think. Logan Smothers will transfer at the end of this season. I don't think Logan Smothers fits with the passing scheme that you saw with Mark Whipple at the University of Pittsburgh last year. Now he's coming in, Mark Whipple, as offensive coordinator to Nebraska, a guy that likes to throw the ball around. Casey Thompson, the transfer from Texas. Of course, you got Chuba Purdy coming in as well. The two quarterback options, it seems, is who's going to be that guy that's going to take over as quarterback at Nebraska. I think it's going to be Casey Thompson, but a big question. There's a lot of things going around Nebraska that to keep an eye on that you probably could have put in here as the question, but you got to have a quarterback. You got to have a quarterback that can consistently sling and that can consistently fit into Mark Whipple's offense. That's going to be the big thing. You got to think Mark Whipple is going to be as much of a factor in this decision picking a quarterback as Scott Frost. So can Nebraska figure out a quarterback situation by the time the spring ends? Because this quarterback battle could leak into fall camp. We'll see if they wanted to, see if they want to have the open competition. But I'm sure Mark Whipple and that coaching staff and Scott Frost would really like to have a firm quarterback option at the end of spring ball to take the leadership role going into fall camp. The next team I want to touch on is the University of Wisconsin. Here's a big question I have for them entering spring football. Can they find other playmakers outside of now 18-year-old Braelon Allen? When I look at this team, I know they're going to have a good defense. I think Jim Leonhard is probably one of the best, if not the best, defensive coordinator in the Big Ten. I'm not worried about their defense. What I am worried about is their offense outside of Braelon Allen. You saw the last game of the season against Minnesota. When Braelon Allen doesn't have a good day, this team can struggle. Okay, Graham Mertz has been very up and down, turned the ball over a lot, especially early in the season. Last season, they even flirted with Caleb Williams out there. Got a new offensive coordinator coming in there, so maybe that'll mix things up. Maybe that will make things a little bit better. But one thing I think these coaches at Wisconsin, especially the offensive coaches, need to identify playmakers outside of Braelon Allen on offense. They need to identify players that can make Graham Mertz's job a little bit easier, because it seemed like his job was very difficult throwing the football, and Wisconsin was not a real threat of throwing the football last season. So in spring ball, they're going to have to ID some of these guys that can step up and be big-time playmakers, because if they can't, if they're riding Braelon Allen all season long, I think it's going to end up a lot like last season. It's going to be a 7-win, it's going to be an 8-win type of season, because there's other teams that have made good jumps in the Big Ten West, which I'll talk about here in just a minute. Let's talk about Iowa. This is a very interesting one. Is Joey Labus the answer to spark Iowa's offense? That's the big question I have for the Hawkeyes entering spring camp. Joey Labus, young quarterback recruit, can move around a little bit better, maybe than Petrus and Padilla. I think Kirk Ferentz said in one of his press conferences late in the season during bowl time that he did practice with the twos. And multiple reports have said he made really good progress throughout the season on the scout team. Is Joey Labus the answer to spark this Iowa offense? Okay, because this was an Iowa offense that at times was very uncreative and very boring to watch at times, and maybe cost them some games, right? Because that defense on the other side is dynamite. Jack Campbell's coming back. Riley Moss is coming back this season. Can Joey Labus be the guy to spark this offense? I think they need to figure out that quarterback situation in the spring, right? Because you had Petrus last year, then you had Padilla, and you're going back to Petrus. They need to try to find some consistency. They need to be very confident in their quarterback selection. And maybe Peterson, Padilla aren't the guys. Maybe it is some fresh blood. Maybe it is Joey Labus to come in there and spark this Iowa offense. That's what Iowa has to figure out, because I believe that this can be a really good offense. Nico Reganey, I think Keegan Johnson can make some plays, a young wide receiver. And then, of course, I think you got the best tight end possibly in the Big Ten, and Sam Laporte is coming back. So you've got some weapons on this Iowa offense. They just need a quarterback that can balance the weapons and run the show and get it to them very, very effectively. How about Minnesota? Dark horse pick to win the West, and I'll tell you why. As they enter spring camp, the big question has to be, can Tanner Morgan and Kirk Ciarocca recreate that magic from 2019, right? He left, his offensive coordinator, Kirk did, after to go to Penn State, didn't work out. West Virginia. Now he's back in Minneapolis as the offensive coordinator for P.J. Fleck. If Tanner Morgan, who kind of took some dips after Kirk left as offensive coordinator, if Tanner Morgan can get back to that 2019 level, this is a Minnesota team that could very well make it to Indianapolis next season. Okay, if that connection can be very good, because sometimes it takes a little bit for an offensive coordinator and a quarterback to really get that connection. If Tanner Morgan and Kirk Ciarocca can get back on that wavelength, because, man, what they have coming back, okay? Because you got Mohamed Ibrahim coming back off of an injury. You've got Chris Ottman-Bell is coming back at wide receiver, and you've got other options at wide receiver. You got other options at running back, and watch out for the offensive line. They got a couple of transfers in there. Quinn Carroll, I believe his name is, out of Edina High School here in the Twin Cities of Minnesota, went to Notre Dame. Once Brian Kelly left, now he's coming back to his home area. He's coming back to Minneapolis in his home metro area. So that's going to be a bigger get than most people think about. And the offensive line, not exactly the sexiest position when we talk about transfer portal additions, but that's going to be a huge transfer portal addition for the Gophers. That offensive line is good. They lost a couple of guys. You bring in a couple of guys. I think that's going to be a really good offensive line. But one thing they got to find out in spring ball is the chemistry back between Kirk Ciarocca and Tanner Morgan. If it is back coming out of spring football, this is an offense and this is a team in Minnesota that could make a big-time dent in the Big Ten West next season. Let's move on to Northwestern, right? Lately, Pat Fitzgerald and Northwestern have had this pattern. Once they go down and have a 2 or 3 win season, they usually come back up and win 8 or 9 games. The question I have, where's the talent? They did not do great in the transfer portal. They lost a decent amount of guys. They lost a couple of key players on defense to the transfer portal. Hunter Johnson, one of their quarterback options, has transferred out. It looks like Ryan Hilinski is going to be the guy in Evanston. You've got Hull at running back, who is a 1,000-yard rusher. But beyond that, where's the talent to see the upgrade? Because the West, as I'm touching on this video, and as I will continue to touch on in this video, is that the West is a very much improved division. It will be a very improved division. I don't think it's going to be the worst division in Power 5 football anymore. So where's the talent at Northwestern? That's what you got to figure out in spring practice. There's going to be a lot of open competitions on this team. Where's the talent to get this team up to 7 wins, 8 wins, 9 wins, like it's been accustomed to? When they take the drop, they usually come back up. That's what they need to identify in Evanston, is the talent to go around those other 2 guys at the quarterback and running back spot. How about Illinois? Transfer quarterback Tommy DeVito transferred from Syracuse to Illinois. Is he enough to give some diversity to this Illinois offense, right? Man, they were lining up. Remember that Penn State 9 overtime game? The game against Minnesota. They're lining up 6, 7 guys on that offensive line. I dare you to stop Chase Brown. I dare you to stop our running game. And most teams couldn't. Most teams couldn't when that happened. So you got to give credit to Illinois. They've got a good defense. But here's the question I have for the Illini. Transfer quarterback Tommy DeVito. Can he blend into this offense early enough? Can he do some good things in spring ball to really isolate himself from Art Sitkowski, who had a couple of good games last year as quarterback of the Illini? Can he separate himself, and can he do enough to diversify this offense? We mentioned Daniel Barker earlier in this video, the Illinois tight end. He's transferring to Michigan State. There's other younger players at wide receiver that should develop and should turn into pretty good players, and maybe the addition of Tommy DeVito, maybe that will cause Brett Bielema and this offense to throw the ball a little bit more, have some balance on offense. That's what I want to find out in the spring. Is Danny or Danny DeVito. Is Tommy DeVito good enough, a little bit taller, is Tommy DeVito good enough to diversify this offense and give it more of a threat? We're going to finish things off with the Purdue Boilermakers. Here's my question. You're losing David Bell, one of the best receivers in Purdue history. And I want to know, can the transfer portal additions of Tyrone Tracy from Iowa and Elijah Canyon from Auburn, will that be enough to replace the production of David Bell? Because if it is, those are two pretty good talents. I'll get to those guys in just a minute. Then they've got some guys coming back as well. Milton Wright last season, over 700 yards receiving and 7 touchdowns. Aiden O'Connell comes back at quarterback. Aiden O'Connell could be one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten. He was very integral in their upsets against Iowa and Michigan State last season. But if Canyon and Tracy can be enough production to replace what David Bell was, this could be a Purdue team that could be spoiler. Watch out for Purdue. If they can figure things out in the spring and those transfer receivers can come in and be playmakers, this is a Purdue team that you have to watch out for. They're going to have to figure out some things on defense, right? They're pretty much, their defense wasn't that great. George Karlaftis was pretty much their only decent player on defense. He left, so we'll see what the heck can happen on the defensive side of the ball. But on offense, this is a team that's loaded at receiver. You got 2 new transfers coming in. Tyrone Tracy, I believe, was underutilized at an offense that didn't really like to throw the ball a lot more. Now he's transferring into Purdue, and I think that's going to fit a lot well. Watch out for Tyrone Tracy to be a big-time breakout player in the Big Ten Conference this year. That's a question I have for Purdue entering spring practice. Can they mesh together? Can this be an explosive offense? Can they replace the production of David Bell? Oh, it's going to be fun spring football to watch. It's going to be a fun West Division to keep an eye on as we get closer to August and those fall previews that I'm going to be doing in the month of August. But that is my West Division. Things to keep an eye on, questions for each West Division team entering spring practice. I want to hear what you guys think. Do you kind of agree on some of these storylines entering spring practice for these West Division teams? I want to hear all things West Division down in the comments. Heck, I'll even take your predictions down in the comments below. Make sure you subscribe. We got all sorts of spring content, March Madness content coming up. Subscribe to Big Ten Ted. I'm Big Ten Ted. I'm out of breath. We'll see you in the next one.